town.
Hi there! Cruise on in. You must be the Waynflete and District Horticultural Society, right? No? Okay, then you gotta be the Moss Valley Agricultural Preservation Society. No? Ah, what the heck. It doesn't really matter who you guys are, as long as we all know who I am. I'm Professor Hank Everglade, visiting environmental anthropologist from the University of Southern California. Now, my research and teachings broadly interrogate the intersections and frictions between cultural natural history and economic values, and the search for sustainable solution to improve the quality of human life and protect the environment. But really, I'm just here because I love your cute little bogs. So enough of the gobbledygook, let's cut to the chase and get on to the swamp monsters. 325 million years ago, whoa, you, bro, would have been standing on the vast supercontinent of Pangaea, sweating like a Thanksgiving turkey at the equator, because this was, ta-da, the Carboniferous period. Most of the planet was covered with dense, swampy forests that were sucking a grip of the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and leaving behind a pile of oxygen to make things grow real big. No, not the dinosaurs, bro. You're way ahead of the game. I'm talking about dragonflies, with wings as wide as gulls, roaches bigger than you ever want to imagine, and a swamp monster 2 meters long. This is Crassigyrinus, or thick tadpole, which is not some kind of mean insult, but actually a really neat way of describing its streamlined, muscular body as it swims real fast through the water, eating fish with its enormous jaws. Snap! But you wouldn't want to be a fish back then, bro. Because if you weren't swallowed by a swamp monster, chances are you get hit on the head by a falling tree. Now, these trees were funny-looking fellas. Tall and pencil-thin with tiny little roots so weedy that one stiff breeze would blow them over, splat, straight into the swamp. One on top of the other. Now, the bacterial bugs and the fungi that should have been breaking these trunks down, it hadn't evolved yet. So the wood just kept piling up until the weight squished the bottom fossilized layer to make peat. And eventually, coal. Years later, white rot finally turned up late to the party, munching away at all the dead wood and released a grip of stored up carbon up into the atmosphere. Whoosh! Climate change! Pangaea began to break up. The dinosaurs arrived, stomped around for about 180 million years, and then were wiped out by a giant asteroid. Kaboom! We hit the big freeze. And as the ice sheets retreated, lowland areas like this one were left with heaps of holes covered with dead green stuff. Now, at first, the meltwater was filled with nutrients that had been sucked up from the soil and the rocks, so the green gunk rotted pretty quickly. But as the water gathered, stagnated, and quite frankly began to stink, the oxygen levels fell. And the peat soil formed the raised bogs and the reed beds of the mosslands as we see them today. Amazing, huh? Now, in between this boggy brilliance were areas of woodland. Now, I know you guys are going to find this hard to believe, being British and northern and all, but the rain actually eased up. The ground got drier. The birch trees got bigger. Along came deer and cattle and humans. Ta-da! Yep, that's right, we finally settled here. Drawing weird modern art and cave walls and sharpening flints to make arrowheads and trying to work out the secret of fire so we could burn away the bushes and finally fix ourselves a decent hot meal. And how do we know all this? Because if we slice down into the 10,000-year-old peat, we can read it like a soggy history book of what grew in it, what died in it, and what set fire to it. We found flints and antler picks that tell us, not literally, because that'd be just plain weird, that hunter-gatherers had settled on the ridges high above the bogs. And these smaller bogs would cozy up together to make bigger bogs, which meant the plant life could thrive and take over. Like Eriophora, or cotton grass, with its fluffy little seed heads that float away on the breeze, and its grass-like leaves that can be used to treat diarrhea. But I just take my word for that, bro. And then we have Calluna vulgaris, which sounds pretty rude, right? But this common heather could be used to make brooms and a basic form of beer, and if you were around in the Iron Age, bro, you'd need a stiff drink. But nothing could absorb liquid like the new super species of bog plant, Sphagnum moss. This bogland beast could soak up 8 times its own body weight in liquid, which is why the Vikings used it to store water on their ships. And it's naturally antimicrobial, so it was used to treat wounds in World War I. Can you imagine the superhero movie? The Bog Avenger, starring Sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss saves the world by soaking up all the floodwater and then wiping out all the bacteria on the way out. Sphagnum moss soaked up the Iron Age rainwater like a big squishy sponge as it oozed over the lowlands and clambered over the ridges, staying wet and cool, obviously, even in summer. You can forget Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis. Sphagnum moss is the real action hero, because when it was finally defeated by death, it sank to the bottom of the bog and turned into peat. And there's something very special about peat. Apart from its amazing ability to soak up carbon dioxide, turn into coal, kill and stop the spread of microorganisms, burn for ages, or make your mom's poppies bloom, it preserves. Let's talk about bogwood. Now, the Irish call it abonos, which is also the name of a Serbian Gothic metal band, but I'm talking about dead trees that are buried in peat bogs. The waterlogged soil with little to no oxygen preserves the wood in the early stages of fossilization for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And the minerals and iron in the water combine with the tannins in the wood to create all sorts of shades from golden brown to jet black. And the wood is so hard that it can only be carved with special cutting tools. Now, if peat can do that to wood, imagine what it can do to people. Look, I'm gonna level with you guys. I feel that over the past 5 minutes or so that we bonded, become buddies, so what do you say? If I was to tell you something big and gnarly, would you guys be okay with that? Okay, here goes. I'm here under false pretenses. I told the good people at the Mining Museum that I'd tell you all about the history of Chat Moss, and I think I've done a pretty good job so far, but really I'm here to test the water, so to speak, to try out my new idea. It's very much the latest in environmental anthropology education. It's Bog the Musical, everyone. I know, it's new, it's radical. But you tell me, bro, which can you name first? A chemical element in the periodic table or UK Christmas #1, right? I'm right, point proven, I think. So I'm gonna share with you a couple of the scenes. It's very much a work in progress, and I might even sing a few snatches of the songs, okay? Picture the scene. The curtain rises on the desolate backdrop of Chat Moss. It's August 1958. Some workmen are digging the peat when one of them suddenly shouts, "Ah, look at this!" This, and cover your ears if you're squeamish, is a severed head. They call the police. A chorus line of trench coats search the area. "We can't find nobody, ain't nobody to be found." So they call in an expert who says, "Hang on, guys. The tannins turned its skin to leather, so it survived all kinds of weather. It's no use searching for some John Doe. This worstly man was killed years ago." The lighting changes. The 50s characters shed their overalls and top coats and become sweaty-looking Celts, dancing feverishly around a fire. It's twilight, 120 AD. A young guy's let in with a rope around his neck. He's just had some Heather homebrew laced with mistletoe, so he's feeling pretty chilled, which is just as well, because his pals are going to sacrifice him to the bog in order to increase the fertility of the land. It's a family show, so we don't actually see the, you know, because dry ice is pumped onto the stage to create a half-earth, half-water borderland to the beyond. The dancers go to the edges of the stages and start to build rough shelters. Meanwhile, eerie music plays, the lights dim, and a flickering, ghostly blue orb of light appears at the back of the stage. As it flickers and floats in the darkness, a stranger enters. He's immediately entranced by the light. The dancers notice and creep forward, singing, "Beware the light, O foolish stranger. It leads you astray and into danger. The flame burns bright in the spirit's hand as it cursed roams this watery land. Foretells the future, which won't be long if you ignore our warning song. Beware, beware, oh will-o'-the-wisp." Come on, guys, you gotta clap along with me here, okay? Come on. Beware, beware, oh will-o'-the-wisp. Beware, beware, oh will-o'-the-wisp. That's amazing, guys. Brilliant. Well done. Now, obviously, the stranger ignores the warning, and he follows the light, and he's dramatically sucked into the bog. He just falls through the trap door in the stage. We're gonna skip forward now a couple of hundred years. It's 1533, and John Leyland, poet and father of English local history, is writing notes in his journal, right? It's like a kind of medieval travel blog. As he sings, the dancers do a modern interpretive dance behind him. Think lots of upwards and outwards movements as the dramatic music plays. We've had forewarning of God's judgment plenty. On this day, Thursday, January 20, boom, 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 boom. The ground broke forth and the moss burst high, and it splintered the trees and it blackened the sky. It poisoned the water, the fish, and the land, and it silted the Mersey as far as our land. Our land! Bog burst, feel the power, feel the worst. Bog burst, feel the power, feel the worst. You gotta sway with me, guys, come on. Bog burst, feel the power, feel the worst. That's great, really, amazing, guys, amazing. Oh, shucks, have you seen the time? You guys have gotta go, I got another group due. Oh, that's heavy, we were just getting going. But anyway, you guys have got to bail, and I got to get back down to business, okay? So thanks for listening, guys. And remember, keep your eyes open for any new shows opening in the West End. And remember, you heard it here first.
Hi everybody, thanks for volunteering to come and watch my presentation. Now, as you know, I'm applying for funding from Northwest Arts to bring the past to life through dramatic performances. But not just any old past, art. I really need to get this right at tomorrow's pitch, so if you don't mind, I'll just make a start and you can give me any feedback at the end, okay? This area was once at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And it's crucial that we capture its priceless heritage for future generations, because in a few years' time there may not be much left. Who'd have thought that last year's miners' strike would have signalled the beginning of the end for one of the most prolific coalfields in this country? It's only 15 years since Astley Green Colliery closed on the 3rd of April 1970. And it would have been completely demolished had somebody not rung up the coal board and said, "Hey up, we need to save that unique steam-winding engine." Thankfully, the Red Rose Steam Society arrived in 1979 to restore and preserve the remaining workings, buildings and machinery. But history is more than just artifacts and dates, ladies and gentlemen. It's also about the people who created it. So today, I'm going to bring the past to life for you through 3 very different characters. My first is Francis Egerton, 6th Earl and 3rd Duke of Bridgewater. the Canal Duke. Born in Worsley in 1736 and dying in 1803, he was considered to be the father of British inland navigation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I just need a moment to become His Grace with the aid of some theatrical magic. Ta-da! Imagine, it's 1799 and the Duke's enjoying an after-dinner glass of claret with friends at his so-called Brick Hall in Worsley. One of the guests, a newcomer, has made the mistake of asking the Duke what attracted him to canal engineering. Why, if I see a problem, I simply want to solve it. My mother said I was a problem child, too stupid to achieve anything. She even talked of cutting the entail. But my canal was the first in this country to cut an entirely new course. We didn't follow a waterway, just the contours of the land and our instincts. The problem was that I had copious amounts of coal and a ready market in Salford and Manchester, but no way of getting it there without paying over the odds. So we set out to break the monopoly of the riverboats and the pack horses, and by gad, we succeeded. Reduced the delivered price of coal to no more than 4p per hundredweight. It was my great friend and land agent Gilbert who suggested taking the canal directly down into the mines. And Brindley, my audacious engineer, who when faced with the River Irwell cried, "We'll just have to cross it!" And damn me, didn't he demonstrate his ideas to the parliamentary committee with a model carved from a block of cheese? Ha 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 ha! They swallowed it too! Ha ha! His Barton Aqueduct was the first navigable aqueduct to be built in England, and as leaky as that damn cheese. But he fixed it, and he came up with the idea of using puddle clay as a watertight lining. If only he'd worn a watertight coat, he might still be with us. God love him. My next problem was opposition from lily-livered landowners. I wanted to extend the canal to the Mersey Tideway at Runcorn to speed up the import and export of goods and materials between Liverpool and Manchester, but not through my estate, they whined. So I had to sell my London home, mortgage my estate, and borrow money to buy up their land and pay for the work to continue. I was so drowned in debt, I shirked payment of my tithes. But the rector determined to waylay me. Fortunately, I saw him coming and bolted. But look at me now! When the lousy French declared war, I was able to offer the government a loyalty loan of £100,000. The king wanted to give me the garter. But I won't have another man's baubles hanging on my chest. 4 years ago, my success created its own problem. My canal had revolutionized transport in this country, so suddenly every jackanape was building one. So when I heard that there were plans to extend a branch of the Leeds and Liverpool to Wigan, I decided to offer a potential link to the main network via my canal. As I invariably say, a navigation should always have coals at the heels of it. So I extended the Duke's Cut from Worsley to Lee, which had enough collieries to justify the work and expense. Engineering has always been my passion. I take pleasure in nothing else. I am lost to the fashionable world and its proprieties, and all the better for it. I have lived wifeless, and I shall die childless. Don't understand women. Don't trust them. By God's blood, I won't have them waiting on me in this house. They are as unsubstantial and unreliable as the peat of Chat Moss. Its surface suggests it will support thee, but test it out and it will let thee down. Oh, gentlemen, I need a top-up.
Very good. Very good. Very good, that. You'd think he built the beggar single-handed where you go on, though. No mention of hundreds of navvies that did all digging.
Well, technically they weren't navvies or navigators, just the Duke's estate workers and miners.
Just, he says.
I mean, they were untrained.
Yeah, but they still had to dig bloody great holes with pickaxes and shovels.
They did, and the Duke gave them decent housing, made sure their wives got some of their weekly wage in food and clothing, and he set up a sick club.
He was still a toff, though, wasn't he? What about the ordinary working man? Why do we never get to hear about him?
Well, actually, my next character was born into poverty and started work at 10 years old. He had to go to night school to learn to read and write.
Now you're talking, lad.
Thank you. George Stevenson was born near Newcastle upon Tyne in 1781 and died in 1848. The father of railways, was the first president of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, designed a miner's safety lamp to rival Davy's, and invented a glass tube to make cucumbers grow straight. But that last incredible invention wasn't until 1845. It's only 1837, and George is in the Dun Cow Inn celebrating his son Robert's completion of the London and Birmingham Railway. It's 4 a.m. and his tongue has been loosened by 1 or 2 tipples, which might affect his accent. This Barclays double stout reminds me of bog water. Lancashire bog water, to be exact. You young fellas don't know what work is in these days. Back then, I had to build a reputation as well as railways. They said it was perfect madness and utterly impossible to form a road of any kind upon Chat Moss. But my motto is always to persevere, even when the whole country was up in arms against the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. The canal companies claimed that the boilers will burst and blow up passengers to atoms. And one of the barristers asked me, suppose one of these engines were to be going along at a rate of 10 miles an hour and a cow were to stray upon the line, would that not be a very awkward circumstance? Yes, I replied, very awkward for the cow. When I tried to access the Duke of Bridgewater's estate, I was threatened to be ducked in the pond. So, one moonlit night, some of our men fired off guns, so all the gamekeepers made off in pursuit of the so-called poachers, enabling a rapid survey to be made in their absence. The initial rejection of the scheme was probably one of the most severe trials I underwent in the whole course of my life, apart from the death of my first wife and my daughter, of course. When the contracts for draining the moss were let, the board appointed me to do the impossible thing that no man in his senses would undertake to do. Chat Moss is a vast mass of spongy vegetable pulp, the surface of which rises like a turtle's back, sloping down to solid land on all sides. I judged that a load could be made to float upon it, so we formed a footpath of ling heather along the proposed route to see if a man might walk upon it without sinking. Success! So, above this we spread tree branches and hedge cuttings topped with a thin layer of gravel, along which the sleepers, chairs and rails were laid in the usual manner. On this ran the wagons, which carried about 1 ton of materials each. If parts of the road sank, the ballast was replaced with cakes of dry turf dug out by the 200 men and boys who who walked the moss with patterns fastened to the soles of their feet. They layered the turf to form an embankment until it finally became joined to the floating world. But after the work continued for weeks and weeks, the company called a board meeting to be held on the moss to decide whether I should proceed any further. The directors were run along the rails in the wagons, which moved at speed, when suddenly the ironically named Mr. Moss was thrown off to meet his namesake. But an immense outlay had been occurred, and great loss would have been occasioned had the scheme been then abandoned, so they were compelled to let me go on with my plans. It were finally finished on 1st of January 1830, and turned out to be one of the cheapest parts of the whole line. It also proved to be one of the best portions, being as smooth and easy to run upon as Dr. Arnott's waterbed. And, dear fellows, that is what I must go off in search of now. Good night.
Well done. Well done. So, the working man got a mention. What about miners? They dug out coal for power railways. Are you going to tell all these arty types about that?
Well, my next character talks about the opening of the pit.
What, a miner?
No, he's one of the brothers who formed the Pilkington Colliery Company, which started excavations in 1908. Edward Pilkington was the eldest of the brothers and chair of the company. Their grandfather formed the famous Pilkington Glassworks in St Helens.
Yeah, but what about the men they employed? What about the poor sods who had to go underground, working in dark, risking life and limb, to keep their company in profit? What about the 1939 disaster? 5 men died that day.
Yeah, I've been researching the disaster, but the miner isn't one of my characters for this presentation.
You're an actor, aren't you? Improvise.
If it was that easy, everybody would be an actor. All right. Let's have a look. Right. The colliery was opened in 1912 and employed the drop shaft method and underhanging tubbing. The Pilkingtons were the first to introduce the German drop shaft method to this country, which was more suited to the heavily watered peat at the surface, which made the going difficult. There were 2 shafts. Number 1, downcast 890 yards deep into the Bin, Cronbrook, Rams and Victoria seams, and number 2, upcast 833 yards deep into the Worsley seam. Both were 21 feet in diameter, brick-lined and used for coal winding. The 98-foot-high lattice steel headgear was shipped from Stockton-on-Tees and built on site.
Listen, that's not acting. It's just reading. It's just a load of facts. You're not telling us what it was actually like for go underground.
All right. How about this then? An account from someone who was below ground in 1939. There'd been a gobfire in the mine at about 2 o'clock in the morning. A spontaneous combustion of refuse. And Mr. Hewitt, the manager, had been summoned to superintend the outbreak. John Skies, 25, said, "I was working at Rams mine when a fire damp came rushing towards us, shouting, 'Come on, lads, there's been an explosion. We have to get the fellas out.' So I raced after him with other men. And it took us a long time to get to the scene of the disaster. When I got there, it was very hot and there was smoke hanging about. I found Mr. Middleton, the under-manager, on the verge of collapse, struggling to pull Frank Morris along with him. I think Mr. Middleton's effort was the bravest thing a man could do. He was in no fit state to walk himself, and he helped others. Despite his injuries, Mr. Middleton had dragged Morris for nearly 200 yards, and at one stage he stopped to release air from a pipe to revive him.
Yeah. See that's what it was like. You looked out for each other. We weren't just workmates, we were brothers. You wouldn't leave a man down there if there was any chance of getting him out alive, and even if there weren't, you'd do your damnedest for bringing him back home. Pits weren't just places of work, they were communities. They called Astley Green the last refuge because it took on so many redundant miners, victims of modernisation and the slumping demand for coal. But you can't make a pit centre of a town or village and then take it away without putting something in its place. That's murder. See, I was a miner since I was 16. I never wanted to be anything else. It stands so proud, the wheel so still, a ghost-like figure on the hill. It seems so strange there is no sound, now there are no men underground. What will become of this pit yard, where men once trampled faces hard? Tired and weary, their shift done, never having seen the sun. Will it become a sacred ground, foreign tourists gazing round, asking if men once worked here, way beneath the pitted gear? Empty trucks once filled with coal, lined up like men on the dole. Will they ever be used again, or left for scrap just like the men? There'll always be a happy hour for those with the money, jobs and power. They'll never realise the hurt they cause to men they treat like dirt. There'll always be a happy hour for those with the money, jobs and power. They'll never realise the hurt they cause to men they treat like dirt.
Hey, what are you doing tomorrow?
Tell you the truth, I'm not busy.
Well, you could really help me with this presentation.
All right, well, so we're going to have a brew?
Yeah, come on, I'll get you a drink.
Right, lad. Got a few things to talk to you about too.
Really? Come on,
Yeah,
then.
come on.
Oh, is that the time? Sorry, I was just grabbing a quick brew. Well, don't be shy, gather round, take a pew. Right, I'll just mute this. Oh, I'd offer you all one, but I'd have to fetch the water from the museum and boil the kettle at least 10 times. That's why we ask volunteers to fetch their own flasks and butties. Well, not that I'm assuming you're going to volunteer today. No, you can't become an eco-warrior on a whim. But it's important you see what's involved before you do. Oh, and don't worry, we're not expecting you all to camp out either. Otherwise it'd be like Glastonbury up here, when we get Glastonbury back. No, this is my own personal campaign. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun a bit. I can see you're all thinking, uh-oh, I only came here to hear about volunteering, not sign up to some environmental boot camp. I'm always getting carried away. Kane, my partner, he says, Eve, you're off on one again. Slow down, back off, you're scaring the horses. Not that there are any horses round here, just pit ponies, but you know what I mean. Anyway, you've seen all the history stuff around the site, yeah? It's great, isn't it? And it's super important that we learn all about the innovators and inventors who changed the way we live and work. But you know what we don't hear enough about? The people who try to keep things the same. Because Protecting stuff isn't as glamorous or as exciting as changing stuff, is it? But we're getting there slowly. How many of you have heard of David Attenborough? Hands up. Greta Thunberg. What about this bloke? Yeah, thought so. More about him later, but first, what is it about the Earth that makes people feel like they have to own it? Ever since human beings could walk and talk, they've been divvying it up into parcels and yelling, "Get off my land!" And all this from short-lived mammals that come and go like mayflies on a planet that's 4.54 billion years old. Give or take 50 million years. There was always some big shot that bags himself a patch of land and then charged everyone else to live on it. And you'd have to fork out more for growing crops or grazing animals. Even bogland like Chat Moss, the kind of land that most people avoided because they never knew where it might be more bog than land, even that was divided into strips with rights of turbary to cut the peat for fuel. For years, the big shots just told the plebs what to do, and we accepted it. And then Parliament got involved, made it all official, and now half of England is owned by less than 1% of the population. 1%? Can you believe that? We're talking about the Earth here, a celestial body. Now, I don't want to get all New Age on you, but some scientists believe in the Gaia theory, that the Earth is one giant living organism with everything on it, including us, part of a single self-regulating system that maintains the conditions for life. And if they're right, we're stuffed. Because for years, we've been taking and giving nought back. Well, Chat Moss is the perfect example. In the 19th century, they thought it was a big wet waste of space, so they dug channels to drain it, make it useful for growing crops. I mean, if that's not bad enough, hello, we're talking about destroying a whole ecosystem here. In 1893, the de Trafford family sold it to the Cleansing Committee of Manchester City Council for sewage disposal. You couldn't make it up, could you? Dig it, drain it and cover it in. At least World War I stopped the peat cutting for a bit. But by then, the water level had dropped so much that scrubgrass and trees took hold. And the layer of leaves was added to by night soil, which is a polite way of describing the free fertiliser for Manchester and Salford's outside bogs. Ugh. In the 20s and 30s, there was so much topsoil that the council used Chat Moss as a giant allotment to grow vegetables and salad crops. And then in World War I, they encouraged the Germans to bomb it. Sorry, not being flippant, I'm just playing devil's advocate so you can see things from the Mosses' point of view. I know, a bit New Age again, but... Oh, sorry, hang on. Oh. Anyway, sorry, I have to check it in case it's something important. It's just my other half. Right, where was I? Oh yes, bombs! Starfish Decoy SF-9A was built in 1941 to confuse enemy aircraft and deflect them from bombing Manchester and Salford. They lit a range of nighttime fires to make it look like an urban area that had already been bombed. Clever, huh? Then they added civil bombing decoy C-25A under the control of, don't laugh, RAF Balloon Command. They lit a range of remote control fires using different types of fuel to imitate the railway marshalling yard at Patricroft Station. All very cunning and a crucial part of the local war effort. But what about the moss? Can you imagine what state it was in after all that? Full of holes, ash, trees and more grass, but underneath it all, peat. So the council allowed firms to dig it out with machines. Another massive wave of destruction. Are you getting a slightly depressing picture here? I tell you, when I first heard about it, I cried. Honest, I did. It was the kids. They'd heard about it at school and asked me if it was true. Kane, my partner, said I was getting carried away and I should get a grip because there's only so much one person can do. But it's not one person if you join a group, is it? I mean, let's face it. Ringo Starr wouldn't have got far on his own. Or Mark Owen. So I went to a meeting organised by the Lancashire Wildlife Trust and heard about all the amazing things they were doing with the Carbon Landscape Partnership. 14 different organisations coming together with all their expertise and volunteers, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. That's a bit more than just one person, Kane, I said. And the more I found out, the better it got. The 1981 Conservation Act, probably not top of your search engine either, but this meant legal protection. SSSI, Sites of Special Scientific Interest, an end to peat extraction on Chat Moss finally, and an ambitious plan to create wilderness around millions of homes in Wigan, Warrington and Salford. A green motorway for wildlife to travel along without dodgy services or pollution, because the mosslands store more carbon than England and France's forests combined, boosting the battle against global warming. A round of applause for that, I think, don't you? Oh, sorry, I meant for the mosslands, not me, by the way. Although, I must admit, becoming an eco-warrior has improved my public speaking, if not my temper. I'm sorry about the mobile distraction. It's just that me and Kane had a massive row last night, again. It's all this guy's fault. Joshua Stiles, ecologist and botanist, founder of the Northwest Rare Plants Initiative. Woo! Can hear you thinking, where do we buy the t-shirts? Well, you can't, because I had this one specially made just to annoy Kane. Don't worry, there's nothing dodgy going on. He's just an amazing young man who really cares about plants. Well, vascular plants, which are basically tubes that conduct water and minerals. He's cultivating and reintroducing plants that have been on the brink of extinction in this region. Did you know that every year, more or less, we lose one plant species in each county in England? I mean, we're always hearing about how we can save the hedgehog or the great crested newt. And I'm all for that. But there's never a campaign to save the lesser bladderwort or the yellow rattle or the great sundew, is there? I mean, can you imagine the cuddly toys for those campaigns? Anyway, once I heard about Joshua Stiles and started following him on Twitter, I was hooked. Because this was a lad, not much older than my own kids, and here he was saving rare plants, showing us older folk what to do. Kane said I was getting obsessed, which basically meant I wasn't watching box sets with him or going to the Tuesday quiz nights. But when he said I was neglecting the kids, well, that really pushed my buttons. I said, we're neglecting the bloody planet. If that's not neglecting our kids, I don't know what is. Because I'm trying to give them a planet that's worth living on. Because who wants to live in a place without plants or trees or weird carnivorous plants? Or the wailing heath chicken? That's the stone curlew to you. A bird that was last seen round here in 1963, but it's back. because we're re-wetting the mosslands and removing the scrub, turning them back into living, growing bogs again. Oh! He's been ringing me all day. I told him, Kane, I told him, I can't stay here and argue with you when there's so much work to do. I needed to be here, in the middle of it all. Because, well, it gives me hope. It makes me think we can undo all those years of industry and exploitation where we put progress before the planet. And we are doing it. We're building a better future for wildlife and local communities. We're using GS mapping and drones to create wildlife corridors that run for miles. We've removed tons of post-industrial spoil to create new habitats. And reintroducing vertebrates and orchids and loads of other funny looking plants. Re-wetting the mosslands is bringing the water table back up, which stops houses from getting flooded. And the Manchester argus, or large heath butterfly, which disappeared from local mosslands over 150 years ago, was reintroduced to Astley Moss in June 2020 thanks to a breeding programme with Chester Zoo. It made Channel 4 News, The Guardian and the BBC. The GM Wetlands Species Reintroduction Project is going to try the white-faced darter dragonfly and the bog brush cricket next. Not as dramatic as Jurassic Park, but a bit more practical. You know, I'm not a big reader, I'm more what you call a doer. But one of the other volunteers told me about this really old poem called Polly Albion. I know, it sounds like a dodgy EastEnders character, but apparently this bloke wrote it about the English landscape in the 1600s. In it there are lots of pictures, and on the Lancashire map, Chat Moss is represented by this cute nymph holding up a block of peat. Now, at the time, she was probably showing folk that it was worth digging up, but now, well, I like to think she's protecting it. Shouting, "Back off, matey, I'm looking after this for everyone." Oh, sorry. Look, I'm going to have to get it because he's not going to stop ringing. Right, what? Right, okay. All right, see you in a bit. Bye. Flaming heck! He's only coming up here with the kids. I better fetch some water and boil a kettle for us all. Well, you don't mind, do you? Besides, it'll give you a chance to fill your volunteers forms in.
Children leave it in the ground with the dead who built this town. For all our children leave it in the ground with the dead who built this town. So for all our children leave it in the ground with the dead who built this town.